She is the Democrat running in Minnesota's 2nd District for Congress. It's an open seat. We spoke with her challenger last Sunday, Jason Lewis. But this is a hot race. The country is watching it. Some national dollars are pouring in. And I wanted you to get to know Angie. Hello.
Roshini, thank you so much for having me today.
What do you want people to know about Angie Craig?
Well, a lot of people learn about me in the newspaper just from the words healthcare executive. And as I've gone around the district, certainly I've served on the leadership team at St. Jude Medical for the last decade of my career. But I've spent my whole life really focused on making sure that our employees and our patients were taken care of. But I grew up in a trailer park to a single mom, and I know how hard Americans will work on behalf of their family. And so my goal is to stand up and represent Minnesota families here in Congress.
So this being an open seat and an election that's really being watched nationally, how do you hope to and how are you trying to differentiate yourself?
Well, look, there's a big difference, I believe, between my opponent and myself on a number of issues, but probably the biggest difference has to do with how we're going to approach serving in Congress. And you know, my opponent, Jason Lewis, has said that he will join the Freedom Caucus. He will be part of the Republican Party that works to shut down the government. I've spent 22 years in the private sector. I know that you have to work with other people. Sometimes people you don't always agree with on every issue. So the biggest difference is I'm going to be going to Congress to look for that common ground that seems to be missing in Washington today. Voters tell me more than anything that they are tired of the partisanship and the pettiness that they are seeing from our Congress, and that is exactly the opposite of what I'd like to be as the representative from the 2nd.
So both you and your opponent kind of come at this not being career politicians, much like Donald Trump is trying to point himself out in that way. So I have talked on this show many times about the rancor in Washington and why can't the parties just get along? What would you, Angie Craig, do if you go to Congress? You are representing the 2nd District, but I say all Congress people from Minnesota are representing the whole state. What would be your first action if you were to win once you get in those doors?
Well, one of the biggest issues that voters talk to me about, and it doesn't matter if it's a Republican voter or a Democrat or where you are on the spectrum, is just the affordability of college today. And I think that's one of those issues there that we can find common ground on. So more specifically, I'm going to be looking for common ground issues, whether it's trade with Cuba or repatriation of company dollars back into the U.S. to invest in growth and R&D, or whether it's college affordability. These are issues, the opioid epidemic, that I believe we can find common ground on. And the truth is, if you aren't looking for common ground, you're never going to find it. So that's what I'm going to do first. But college affordability is just a very important topic to me. High quality public education and affordable college, creating a situation where jobs are being created back in the United States, making sure that we're growing our economy, and frankly, strengthening Social Security, protecting Medicare, and tackling the high cost of prescription drugs. That's another one of the key issues that, as I've talked to voters, I don't find a senior anywhere who isn't experiencing the high cost of prescription drugs, and EpiPen is only one such example. It's endemic, and that's something that I'd really like to take on.
I'm talking with Angie Craig. She is the Democratic candidate in Minnesota's 2nd District, running for Congress in an open seat right now after Congressman Klein decided not to run for re-election. Do you go about the race, Angie, in a little different way, knowing that's an open seat and you're not running against an incumbent?
Well, I think you do. You don't have a history of votes on either side to point to. So I think what we say we will do when we get to Congress and how we will behave when we get there is very important. For example, my opponent in this race likes to say that he happens to like government gridlock. and that he thinks shutting down the government is actually a productive exercise. I thought Senator Klobuchar showed excellent example the last government shutdown when the Freedom Caucus members, who my opponent says he would join that caucus, by donating her salary to the National Institutes of Health. Because at the end of the day, there are real people affected when members of Congress just stake out their position and say, I'm going to just shut down the government rather than work with the other side. There are real consequences to Minnesota families.
All right, so I never really say who I'm going to vote for, what my party persuasions are on this show, because then I can compliment and criticize everyone and ask everyone the tough questions. But I will say that after interviewing Jason, meeting him for the first time last week, meeting you for the first time today, I don't know that I've seen two more in stark contrast to one another candidates that Minnesota is sending. So the bottom line is, when you are trying to convince the 2nd District to elect you, and these are hardworking people in the 2nd District, why should they vote for you?
Well, I'm going to stand up for Minnesota families. Look, I don't think today I'd be running for Congress if the cost of college, a state college tuition, was what it is today. And we just took 2 boys to college in the last couple of weeks. One drove back today just to come to the state fair. But I don't think I'd be running for Congress sort of coming out of the trailer park. And I just believe that every family in this country, if they're willing to work hard, ought to find a path to opportunity. And there's a big difference if you're in Washington actually trying to create those mechanisms and those paths, or if you're in Washington just to be an ideologue or prove a point about the government. Look, I want to get this country back on track. I've been in the private sector for 22 years. Before that, I was a print journalist. And I just really believe that we need people in Washington who are more concerned with working on behalf of Minnesota families than, frankly, the D or R or any letter behind their name on the ballot. And so that's why I believe Minnesota's 2nd Congressional District voters will choose someone who's actually looking for that common ground we talked about before.
I'm talking with Angie Craig. She is running for Congress from the 2nd District. She is the Democratic candidate. We're going to take a break, but if you have a question for her, come up to the porch. You'll get your question right here on the microphone. You can ask her directly. I want to do a quick plug for my 105 guests because I see them in the audience. My, as I like to call them, boys of summer, boys of business. Dale Kirshner from Twin Cities Business Magazine and Neil St. Anthony from the Star Tribune are my business panel at 105. So some of what we'll get into when we come back, Angie, I want to talk with you about jobs also. We're going to take a quick break and then we'll be back.
Welcome to Play It, a new podcast network featuring radio and TV personalities talking business, sports, tech, entertainment, and more. Play it at play.it.
Roshini Rajkumar out here at the Minnesota State Fair. Come see me on the WCCO radio porch right off of Underwood, the corner of Carnes. Very easy to find. I'm talking with Angie Craig. She is the Democratic candidate running in Minnesota's 2nd District. This is an open seat, people. If you don't vote or aren't planning on it, you gotta vote November 8th. If you're in the 2nd District, Angie Craig is one of your choices. So we're going to go to, we've got a lot of questions here for you, Angie, so I want to get those in. If anyone out here at the porch wants to ask her a question, come right on up. What is your name?
My name is Cheryl. And Angie, I'm very interested. I'm 62 years old and I'm getting ready to retire. I'd like to retire someday. I'm very concerned about the comments at the national level about changing the retirement age and about privatizing Social Security. Could you speak to those issues, please?
Yeah, thank you so much. I spent all day on Thursday of last week actually doing serving the 2nd District seniors tour, and there is a very big difference between myself and my opponent in this race. Is that I, like you, my own parents are 64 and 65 years old and are looking toward retirement. I think we need to do everything we can to protect Social Security and strengthen Medicare. And I happen to be running against someone who believes that we should raise the retirement age and that we should, quote unquote, undo Medicare. And I think that we are not serving our seniors and treating them with the dignity and respect that we deserve if we don't do the same thing that, frankly, President Reagan did in 1983, which is pull both sides together and find a bipartisan solution to make sure that these programs are available to our seniors for years to come. But we've got to get after the high cost of prescription drugs if we ever want to deal with, the Part D Medicare side. And we've got to pass a law that allows the United States to negotiate with drug companies for pricing. The idea that you're the biggest customer in the world and by law you're not allowed to negotiate your pricing, to me that's just wrong, and we need to pass those savings on to our seniors. So
all right, we're
going
to do a bit of a fire round with Angie Craig. We've got about 4 minutes left with her. I want to get to these questions. Your name?
My name is Kat, and I was wondering, I'm a college student, and I know you touched on some of the issues like we're facing, like affordability and the student loan crisis, and then there are also other issues such as higher rates of mental illness and limited job availability. So I was wondering if you have a message for college students like me.
Yeah, so I worked for a business that paid an interest rate of about 2.3% on its loan. So to me, it's unconscionable that we're charging what we are in interest rates. We're also, as a nation, one of the shortest payback periods in the world. So, I think there are a number of things that we can do to be helpful to college students and help you afford your college education here moving forward. But thank you.
And what is your name?
My name's Kyle, and you talked about our senior senator, Amy Klobuchar, and her commitment to sort of bipartisan compromise and reducing the political rancor. I was just wondering if she'd offered you or your campaign any other support or pointers and like what you might do in that spirit once you get to Congress.
Well, Senator Klobuchar has been one of my strongest supporters, and I'm just absolutely thrilled and humbled to have her support. She's actually done some campaigning. We were together a couple of weeks ago out in Goodhue, and we will be doing some events moving forward, and I think she'll be doing some photo ops with me to send to voters to make sure that they know she's supporting me and my approach as a member of Congress.
And what is your name?
Abigail. My question is, I was just wondering if you could mention a few specific areas where you could work with Republicans.
Yeah, I think college affordability is an area we should be able to find some common ground. I think the opioid epidemic in this country has touched way too many families. I think we can find some common ground there. I think trade with Cuba. I think we can find common ground on trade with Cuba. And frankly, I think for the topic of actually creating jobs, I'd love to see the $2 trillion that American companies are holding overseas right now. I'd like to entice them to bring those dollars back if they will invest in infrastructure development here in America, if they will invest in jobs in the U.S. and in R&D in the U.S. So I think these are all areas we can find some common ground if we have people in Washington who are actually looking for common ground. That's the key.
I'm talking with Angie Craig. She's a Democrat running in Minnesota's second, a hot race getting national dollars, national attention. You are very focused on the workforce. Tell us a little bit of the reason why.
Well, so I spent the last 4 years of my career at St. Jude in charge of a workforce of about 16,000 employees in about 100 countries. So I will tell you that I understand the challenges of filling a workforce. And 66% of manufacturers here in Minnesota tell us that they have a hard time finding the right work skill for the jobs that they have. And I certainly had that experience when I was the head of HR for St. Jude. And so I think these public-private partnerships and making sure that technical education and apprenticeship programs and partnerships with technical community colleges, I think they're really, really important to make sure that we have the work skills available for the regional jobs that actually exist in Minnesota. And so this is going to be a very strong point for me. And in fact, I've hosted several events now in the district, meeting with businesses, small businesses, larger businesses. Remember, the company I worked for started essentially in a garage with a couple of people. So we need to make sure that small business has the opportunity to create the next big employer in Minnesota. And I think having someone with the perspective of working in business and having to fill jobs will help me understand those dynamics in a way that others might not.
Real quickly, Angie, this is a hot race. It could get negative pretty fast. If it does, how will you handle that?
Well, my job is to tell the voters of the 2nd Congressional District why I'm the best candidate. It's also to point out where the contrast exists between Jason Lewis and I. And quite frankly, Jason has said many, many things over the years on right-wing radio that I disagree with vehemently. And it's terrifying that now that he's running for Congress, he wants to put those words into action. And so we're going to make sure that voters know what I have said and what I believe. And I'm sure this race is going to draw a lot of outside folks trying to speak inside it as well. I'm going to stay focused on the message that we've been talking about and just asking the voters of the 2nd District to send the person to Congress who they believe is going to best stand up for them.
And real quickly, one of my most important questions today, your favorite food at the Minnesota State Fair.
All right, so I ate an entire candied bacon BLT
Oh, my God.
On Friday, and I did take a whole bucket of Sweet Martha's home. I have 4 teenagers. 18,
sugar.
17. So the bucket is just about empty this morning.
All right. Thank you so much, Angie Craig, the Democrats candidate in the 2nd District. When we come back in our 1 o'clock hour, it is jam-packed with some illustrious Minnesotans. The Boys of Business, Neil St. Anthony, Dale Kirshner at 105, Melvin Tennant at 135. You're listening to News and Views.